Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video that was sent to me by Dale on my website. It is a recent-ish re-upload of an older creationist seminar called The Complete Creation, hosted by Ian Juby, an unfortunately Canadian creationist who runs a registered charity called Citizens for Origins Research and Education. Which I guess means that in Canada you can get tax-exempt status as a charity for teaching nonsense to children. That's unfortunate. Fortunately, they do seem to be on the decline. Their revenue has dropped from its peak of $37,000 in 2016 to $15,000 in 2018. Maybe I should register my channel as a charity. I provide free education targeted towards adults who have been miseducated or undereducated as children. Then all my patrons could get tax receipts, and I'd have to pay significantly less income tax. Huzzah! But yeah, that's not going to happen. Running a YouTube channel isn't exactly a humanitarian enough enterprise to warrant not paying taxes, in my opinion, and since I'm not religiously affiliated, I feel like I'd have to answer more questions about what I actually do to help before the government would bless me with charity status. Not to mention the fact that in order to get away with it, I'd have to basically register all the stuff I use for my channel, which includes my house, as property of the charity, and should my charity status ever be revoked, I'd have to either pay a huge chunk of tax on it, or give it to another charity. Or I could start a religion. The Church of Rhinoism. That'd be much easier. Anywho, that's a weird tangent to start on, so let's just jump in and take a look at the video.
Reading the Bible and taking its stories at face value seems to make some pretty outlandish claims.
Yeah, I'll say. Talking animals, real magicians, astrology, locusts that wear crowns and look like battle horses with people faces, lady hair, lion's teeth, and wings that sound like chariots, among other oddities.
Talks about a recent creation some 6,000 years ago. The first humans created as humans, and only one simple instruction given. Don't eat the fruit on this one tree.
Sure, those things are strange, but at least they're a little bit intuitive.
A talking snake asked the two first humans, did God really say that?
The question it asked is not what makes it strange. It's the fact that it's a talking snake, and it's never said in the book to be anything other than just a snake that has the ability to talk. But snakes don't have the physical gear required to make human language sounds. That's what's strange about that part of the book.
Science would surely say that all the stories in the Bible were impossible nonsense.
Not all the stories, but a lot of them, maybe even most of them. Though they do become a lot more plausible if we remove the supernatural elements from them. Would a king steal a wife from one of his soldiers and then send that soldier to the front lines to die? Sure, that's entirely plausible. I'd be willing to bet that King David wasn't the only king to do such a thing. Though archaeological evidence for King David's existence is rather sparse, and if he did exist, his kingdom was probably not even close to being as big and powerful as it's depicted in the Bible. But if he existed, I have no doubt that the Bathsheba story could easily have its basis in a true event.
You know, the science that brought you microwave ovens, the internet, space travel, and amazing modern miracles of medicine.
I mean, those all come from different branches of science, but yes, scientific methodology has made our modern lives much more comfortable than any other time in history, even for some of the poorest among us. Access to the internet has been recognized globally as a human right since 2003, and along with internet access comes access to more information than anyone else in pre-internet history has ever had access to. Scientific methodology didn't get us here by appealing to supernatural powers. It was accomplished through naturalism.
The science that says the Earth is billions of years old. The science that says we humans evolved over many millions of years from ape-like creatures. The science that brought us the Big Bang and the dinosaurs.
Yep, all that knowledge thanks to scientific methodology.
Which science says aren't even mentioned in the Bible.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, in my opinion, they aren't mentioned in the Bible, but I could certainly see an argument being made that Behemoth and Leviathan were creations based on fossil finds. But the Middle East is not a great place to find fossils, so it's not very likely.
And that science says We have the fossils right here to show it.
Well, I mean, we don't have fossils that show dinosaurs not being mentioned in the Bible. That's just a silly statement on its face. But we do have fossils that demonstrate evolution pretty well, so there's that. And it's not just fossils either.
But did science really say this?
Well, science is not some monolithic institution. Science is a process. The scientific method has been used to discover evolution, dinosaurs, and everything else you mentioned, and it has conclusively demonstrated that several of the stories in the Bible, like Noah's flood, cannot possibly be literally true. But there is no one singular institution known as science which makes proclamations that we must abide by, which seems to be what you're describing.
You see, I love science. Started teaching it when I was 16 years old. I also love my Creator, whom I would contend is none other than the Lord Jesus Christ.
That is an interesting way to phrase that. Can you really say that you love your Creator if you don't know who that Creator is, if you can only contend that He is your Creator?
But I can't say I was always like that. It's a long story, but there was a time when I rejected Christ and was so angry with both Him and the words written in this book that I repeatedly whipped it against the wall in fits of rage.
Right, sure. I totally believe that. Like, seriously, do you actually expect people to believe that you were such an angry atheist who isn't really an atheist but is just someone who is mad at God, that you would have a fit of rage that had you throwing your book at the wall? You're painting your past self as a ridiculous Christian movie-style caricature of what an atheist actually is, and it's not believable. It may make the Christians who watch this feel more comfortable reaffirming their knowledge that atheists are really people who are just mad at God, but you're not going to change any atheist minds by presenting yourself this way. I mean, that's probably not your goal, so sure, I guess, but you're setting Christians up to be shocked when they meet people who are atheists who are not the stereotypical angry at God style atheists.
Maybe that's where you're at today, and I get it.
And then you pretend that you're directing this ridiculous story at atheists. I know many atheists. I do not know any who have been so mad at God that they have thrown a Bible at a wall. Now, maybe there are some out there somewhere who have legitimate anger management issues that may have thrown a Bible at a wall in anger over something, but that's not the norm. And just out of curiosity, I posted a poll on Twitter asking my atheist followers how many of them have been mad enough at God that they threw a Bible at a wall. And within 6 minutes of posting the poll, I got a bunch of responses from atheists pointing out that they can't be mad at something that they don't think exists. I almost wish I had turned off replies for that one, because now my notifications are going to be destroyed for the day. Future Rhino cutting in to follow up. That poll made it outside of my core audience, and I had a bunch of atheists angrily replying to me that it's a malformed question. Of course they aren't mad at something they don't believe in. Why would I even phrase it that way? It's utterly ridiculous. So, yeah, my most popular Twitter poll ever now has a bunch of atheists thinking that I'm a Christian apologist getting ratioed.
Now, I understand why some of you will look at me like I'm some kind of conspiracy nut who also has two heads or something. I get it. After all, how can you deny science?
That image is quite possibly one of the most misunderstood images in all of scientific history. Now, maybe not, maybe that's a bit hyperbolic, but it seems that way to me. So here's the deal with that. It is an oversimplified picture whose original intent was to simply show the similarities between the species that eventually led to humans. It was originally published in the Early Man volume of the Life Nature Library, and it was a 4-page foldout, not the simplified 5-species image that we usually see. The author of the book understood that evolution was not a linear progression, and each of the species in the progression had different descriptions for them, and several made it clear that the author was entirely aware that those species are not actually our ancestors, they just represent what our ancestors from that time might have looked like. But it is being misused by creationists who point to it as an example of what evolutionists believe, and it's being misused by non-creationists who point to it and declare that it's completely unscientific. The way creationists use it, yes, it is completely unscientific. But if you go take that book out of a library and actually read it, it's not unscientific. Though, having been authored more than 50 years ago, it is outdated.
But let me start right there. This simple chart we've all seen, so eloquently depicting the fossil evidence of the evolutionary ascent of ape-like creature to man, the vast majority of people do not know that this fossil sequence is only found in 3 places on the entire planet.
I haven't watched ahead yet, but I'm guessing he's about to say textbooks, museums, and something else. But the thing is, we don't expect to find a fossil sequence where the older one is buried in the strata immediately below the younger ones in a perfect succession, as seems to be the implication here. But we do find these fossil sequences when we properly date the strata that they are found in. Not exactly the sequence depicted in that image, and we are aware that few, if any, of the depicted organisms are in our line of ancestry, but the sequence itself is real.
Textbooks, museum displays, and the imaginations of people.
Oh, creationists are so predictable.
This sequence does not exist in physical form anywhere on this planet. In fact, if you were to accurately depict in graphical form what we actually find, it would look like this.
I don't know what that's even supposed to represent, but here's an actual image of the specimens that we have, graphed with their temporal distribution. If this is what you're going for, it's not hard to find. But it's not as easy to digest for someone who's not particularly interested in the subject, whereas the March of Progress image is, though the erroneous understanding it is likely to leave them with is admittedly problematic.
And the interpretation of many of the alleged half-ape, half-human fossils are controversial even among die-hard adherents to evolution.
Are you referring to the fact that some of them fit so perfectly between 2 different categories that we can't agree which category they properly belong in? Because that does happen, and it's actually to be expected, since nature doesn't conform to our arbitrary categorization system. If creation were true, though, it would not be expected. According to creation, God invented the categories. They are not arbitrary, so it should be perfectly easy to categorize organisms based on the categories that God created. But it's not. It's more of a gradient that completely ignores our human attempts at organization.
As a matter of fact, you'll get to see that some of these alleged half-ape, half-human ancestors really are half-ape, half-human, because they mixed human fossils with ape fossils to reconstruct these skeletons.
Taking bets now that he's referring to Piltdown Man, the hoax that was discovered to be a hoax largely because of our increasing understanding of human evolution.
They made a Frankenstein chimera and then claimed it to be proof of evolution. How could science be so wrong?
Being wrong is how we learn. Piltdown Man is a special case because it was a deliberate forgery, but science advances largely by being wrong and then figuring out why we were wrong. The fact that you would even ask that question in that way demonstrates that you don't understand the scientific method.
Now, being a vocal proponent of true science, I would like to start this series right there.
And let me just stop you in your tracks right there. Creationism is not true science. Science is a process of discovery. Creationist scientists don't often follow the scientific method, instead choosing to start with their desired conclusions and only looking at data that can potentially lead to those conclusions to the exclusion of the majority of the data that actually falsifies their conclusions. That is not true science.
Because we can't determine what science says or does not say until we even know what science is. And unfortunately, there's an incredible amount of ignorance on that very topic. I lay the responsibility for that at the feet of the self-proclaimed science educators.
That's a rather broad brush, wouldn't you say? I mean, if it turns out that creationism is somehow correct despite all the evidence to the contrary, then wouldn't that make all the creationist speakers, such as yourself, science educators? So isn't being a science educator something that you are actively trying to do right now? The main difference I've seen is that science educators who don't have an agenda, like proving a young Earth, for example, often encourage their viewers to check up on them. Don't take their word for it, look at the sources, learn how to critically evaluate scientific materials to find out if there are any shenanigans going on. Now, certainly there are creationists who make a show of doing something like this. Mike Riddle and his fuzzy words come to mind, but you'll notice that his criticisms are rather insubstantial. He likes to play word games and complains about the choice of language in what are usually popular science reporting articles rather than actual scientific papers. I have yet to see a creationist actively encourage anyone to do any sort of thorough checking on their sources, unless that source is the Bible, and even then, not often. Hell, one of my favorite podcasts is The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and a repeating theme on that show is that one of the co-hosts will get excited about some really cool implication that's being promoted as the result of some study or other, followed by Dr. Stephen Novella immediately stepping in and pointing out that this implication is almost pure speculation, and it's incredibly unlikely to pan out that way. How many shows go out of their way to quash excitement on a scientific issue because they are more concerned with accuracy than about presenting sensationalist content that will get clicks?
PBS, National Geographic, the National Center for Science Education, Bill Nye the Science Guy, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, and the likes.
Yeah, there's a lot of good scientific material that can be found from all of those sources. And while most of those are not sources that I keep tabs on, I am aware of several of them changing their positions on sometimes major topics based on new information. Bill Nye's chapter on GMOs in his book Undeniable comes to mind immediately. Not sure I would say that any of those are self-proclaimed science educators. Several of those are institutions, and science education is certainly a part of those institutions' goals, but it's not like they just showed up and said, "We're here to educate people on science," and so everyone listened. They earned their reputations. Some more than others. National Geographic isn't quite as reputable as it used to be. It's still pretty good, but I tend to be more skeptical of their articles the more recent they are.
Interestingly, with each of these individuals or groups, you can see their historic descent into madness when they attempt to defend the theory of evolution.
Yup, we all a bunch of crazies down here. Join us.
Room for one more.
They inevitably contradict and otherwise refute themselves while proclaiming bold statements that reveal their glaring ignorance on what science even is.
And I'm sure you have many examples that definitely won't have context removed at all.
This descent into madness happens because, as you will see shortly, in order to defend the theory of evolution, you must deny true science.
Yeah, that's a nefarious little setup. Who is the gatekeeper of true science? You? I know your answer would probably be God, but God doesn't seem to speak for himself, at least not anymore. Yeah, Bible, but the Bible doesn't actually say much on science, and when it does, it's usually wrong. So science needs someone to dictate what is true science and what isn't. And since God no longer speaks for himself, he needs his representatives on earth to speak for him. That's what you're proposing, isn't it? Except, really, true science doesn't rely on dictates from an authority. It is a process. Anyone can do science. We've just reached a point in our scientific advancement where most of the low-hanging fruit has been picked, so in order to actually do any meaningful work in a scientific field, you have to specifically study that field for a few years first, just to get your understanding to a point where you are even capable of making your own contributions.
Now, a couple of years back, I saw a meme on the internet. An alleged quote attributed to Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'll be honest with you. When I first saw the meme and read the quote, this is the meme that came to mind.
Okay, sure, I get that. Maybe he wasn't the first person to say it, but he certainly did say it.
We debated global warming. Two of the people did not believe in it. Oh, no, one person didn't believe in it. Two of them didn't believe in evolution.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it. You see, that's the... I'm just saying.
That's very good.
Thing is, though, even if he wasn't the first person in history to say that phrase, it's still a true statement.
Like the Abraham Lincoln meme, I honestly figured some internet troll had made what he thought was a profound argument, slapped deGrasse Tyson's name on it to give it authority. The alleged quote was profoundly nonsensical.
How is it nonsensical? I mean, sure, it's a quick soundbite that oversimplifies the issue, but the universe operates with the same principles whether or not you believe in those principles doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Like I said, science is a process, but there is such a thing as the scientific body of knowledge, which is the collective body of knowledge that we have scientifically verified at this point in history, and I suspect that that is what he was referring to with that quote. It was actually specifically about evolution. Bill Maher had just mentioned having two people on the show that don't believe in evolution, to which Tyson replied with that quote. Given that the current body of scientifically verified knowledge includes the theory of evolution, I'd say it was an appropriate reply.
I didn't actually believe deGrasse Tyson said this until I saw and heard him say it. It was during an interview with left-wing extremist Bill Maher on Real Time, produced by HBO.
I know you guys like your labels, but Bill Maher's is a hard one to pin down. He does tend to favor left-wing positions on most issues, but he also holds some positions that would have some people calling him a racist right-wing xenophobe. He holds some positions which I very much agree with, and he holds some that I very much do not agree with. It's almost like people are more than just the political labels that they can sometimes have applied to them. But yeah, you guys like your us versus them.
Notice the subtlety of Maher bringing up evolution, and deGrasse Tyson then sneakily swapping out the word evolution and replacing it with the word science.
Well, the conversation started with climate change and then pivoted to evolution, so it's not so much that he was sneakily swapping words, it's that science is a word that encompasses both topics, so was an appropriate word to use. But my question here would be, why are you bothering to attack some science communicator if true science is actually on your side?
He then swaps out the word science for the word truth.
No, he didn't swap it. He used true as an adjective to describe science. If I say that my van is blue, whether you believe it or not, I didn't swap out the word blue for van. I used the word blue to describe my van, because that's how adjectives work.
This is significant. deGrasse Tyson butchers science as a whole with a completely nonsensical statement that betrays his apparent ignorance on what science is and is not.
Sure. Ian Juby, the creationist with no apparent credentials, at least not any I could find, knows more about what science is than a man with a PhD and Master of Philosophy degree, both in astrophysics, whose work on the Kalin-Tololo supernova survey helped establish Type 1a supernovae as standard candles. Sorry, but as a guy that also has no credentials, I'm going to go ahead and trust the guy who has actually done science that you can go and look up and read right now, over the guy who hasn't, when it comes to describing what science is.
Science cannot be truth.
No, because science is a process. However, scientific knowledge can be true. Now, he goes on to use quotes from other scientists who mention the fact that science is a self-correcting process to claim that Neil deGrasse Tyson obviously doesn't know what he's talking about when he said that science is true, and I don't want to just keep harping on how he was probably referring to that specific scientific knowledge. After all, science is a self-correcting process. It has no authorities. If deGrasse Tyson said something incorrect, then he is incorrect. End of story. Doesn't make evolution any less of a fact, it just makes Neil deGrasse Tyson wrong. Since this point is so very inconsequential, I'm just skipping the rest of it.
So what deGrasse Tyson currently thinks this truth is today may not be truth to him next week in light of new evidence.
Which is the correct attitude to have. Word games aside, your point seems to be that this scientist said something that was phrased sloppily once, therefore we can't trust anything he says, so when he says evolution is a fact, he must be wrong. Stop attacking people, start attacking ideas. deGrasse Tyson could come out as a creationist tomorrow, and it would not change the fact that evolution happens. So just stop wasting your energy on this. Will he manage to prove evolution wrong without relying on pedantic attacks on poorly phrased talk show quotes? To find out, tune in tomorrow. Same Rhino time, same Rhino channel.